One of the only ancient humans whose last meal we can still read died on a high mountain pass in the Alps around 5,300 years ago. The ice kept him so perfectly that researchers could open his stomach and list what was inside. Dried ibex meat, a startling amount of fat, nearly half of everything in there. Red deer, whole unground grains of einkorn wheat, and a few flecks of a toxic fern he almost certainly never meant to swallow. We call him Ötzi, and his belly is the closest thing we will ever have to a photograph of a single prehistoric day, plate and all. But one frozen man is not an answer. He lived after farming had already arrived, and a single meal is not a diet. So here is the real question, the one his stomach can't quite reach. For the tens of thousands of years before anyone planted a seed, before bread, before herds, before the shelf and the checkout line, what did a normal human actually eat between waking and sleeping? The obvious answer is meat. We picture the cave, the spear, the mammoth, a hunk of something dripping over a fire, the original paleo diet. It is one of the most confident images we own of the deep past. It is also, on most days, wrong. Because here is the strange part. The single food we imagined them living on was the one food they could least rely on. Watch the people who still hunt with a bow and arrow today, and the pattern is humbling. They come home empty-handed more than half the time. You cannot build a day, let alone a species, around a coin flip. So if the hunt fails by lunch, and it usually did, what carried everyone through to morning? Start with the truth that erases the cartoon entirely. There was never one menu. A day's food on the Arctic ice, where almost nothing grows, was seal and fish and fat. A day's food near the equator was mostly green and growing. The caveman diet was never a single plate. It was whatever the latitude, the season, and that particular morning happened to offer. That flexibility was not a weakness. It was the entire strategy. So forget breakfast, lunch, and dinner. A real day didn't begin with a meal. It began with hunger and a walk. You left camp with an empty stomach and you ate as you went. A few berries here, a fistful of seeds there, a bird's egg, a tortoise, whatever the trail surrendered. Among the Hadzu of Tanzania, one of the last peoples on Earth still living largely on wild food, plants make up something like 70% of the calories. The steady food, the food that showed up whether or not anyone made a kill, came from gathering, not the spear, the digging stick. For a long time we told this with a tidy split. Men hunted, women gathered, and lately even that has been fought over. With one study finding women hunting in most foraging societies, and a wall of other researchers pushing back hard. The honest answer is that the line was blurry, and it bent with the family and the day. But the deeper point survives the fight. The reliable calories came out of the ground and off the branch, gathered by hand, one at a time, and the unglamorous champion of that whole menu was the tuber. Ask a Hadza forager to rank their foods, and the tuber lands dead last. Fibrous, bland, more chewing than reward, but it is everywhere, and it is always there. In the dry season, the lean season, the season when nothing else will ripen. It is the food you eat not because you want it, but because it never abandons you. Every cuisine has a quiet staple like that. This was the first one. At the other end of that scale sat the food everyone actually dreamed about. Honey. To the Hadza, honey is no fallback. Men and women alike name it their single favorite thing on earth to eat, and in a good season it can supply close to a fifth of all their calories. They find it with the help of a small bird, the greater honey guide, that chatters at a person, then flits from tree to tree, leading them straight to a hidden hive, and waits for a share of the wax as its fee. No other wild animal is known to lead humans to food like this. Sometimes a forager walks out on an empty stomach, and the whole meal he comes home on is honey. Just honey. And on the coast, the day ran on a different clock entirely, the tide. In a cave on the South African shore, archaeologists found the discarded shells of mussels and sea snails dating back more than 160,000 years. The oldest seafood dinner ever found. But you couldn't simply stroll down and scoop them up. The richest beds sat underwater, uncovered only during a strong low tide, sometimes for as little as 90 minutes. So these people learned to read the moon, timed the water, and ran an entire day around a narrow window the sea opened and then slammed shut. Pair those mussels, rich in fat, and the omega-3s a growing brain craves, with a few starchy roots, and you have something close to a perfect meal eaten 160,000 years before the first restaurant. Then there is the discovery that should retire the word paleo from every diet menu forever. In a cave in southern Italy, on a smooth stone no bigger than a hand, scientists found the crushed starch of wild oats, ground into flour 32,000 years ago. Other grinding stones from the same age, from Russia to the Czech Republic, carried wild grass and cattail root. The grains had been heated first, then pounded into powder, which means that 20,000 years before the first farm, people were already making something close to porridge, or flatbread, from scratch. The first humans weren't avoiding carbs, they were grinding them into oatmeal. Now circle back to Ötzi, and that strange wall of fat in his stomach. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't gluttony. Fat was the most precious thing on the entire prehistoric menu, the richest fuel by far, and the difference between surviving a cold night and not. Lean meat alone won't save you. Eat nothing but it, and you can starve with a full stomach, a real condition that killed frontier trappers living on rabbit. Ancient hunters knew this in their bones. They prized the marrow, the brain, the fatty organs, and they would sometimes walk away from a kill that was simply too lean to be worth carrying home. Ötzi's greasy Last Supper wasn't crude. It was expert. Which brings us, at last, to the thing that was quietly doing the real work the entire time. Not the spear, the fire. Because the day didn't end where it began. It ended back at camp, around a flame, with the one real meal. And cooking was no luxury. Raw food is a surprisingly poor fuel for a creature like us. A chimpanzee can spend as much as 6 hours a day simply chewing. Eat your food raw and your gut has to wrestle every calorie out of it, and many slip past undigested anyway. But cook it. Heat the starch until it swells and ruptures, soften the meat until it surrenders, and the very same food gives up far more energy for far less effort. One anthropologist, Richard Wrang, argues that this single trick is what built us. Cooking handed our ancestors a flood of extra calories and as much as 4 free hours a day, and that surplus is what could feed a brain that is about 2% of your body weight, but burns a fifth of its energy. Not everyone agrees on when it began or how much it mattered, and that debate is genuine and unfinished. But one fact is hard to argue with. We are the only animal that cooks, and we never once stopped. There is one more thing the fire did, and it may be the most human part of all. We carry our food home. Nearly every other animal eats where it finds it. On the spot. Alone we don't. We haul the tuber and the honey and the mussels and the kill back to a shared fire, and we divide it. The lucky hunter feeds the one who came home with nothing today, knowing the odds will flip tomorrow. A day's eating was never a solo triumph. It was a pool. The meal was insurance, paid in advance, against the certainty that some days the hunt simply fails. So picture the real day now, not 3 meals. Not one heroic kill, a long grazing, opportunistic stream of small things. A root here, a handful of berries there, honey if you were lucky, mussels if you timed the tide, meat if you were luckier still. All of it carried back to a single fire and split among people who were counting on each other to survive. The signature of the ancient human diet was never one food at all. It was variety, it was processing, it was sharing. A digging stick, a grindstone, a flame, and a group. And tonight, when you eat, when you warm something on a stove your ancestors would have wept to own, and set it down across from another person, and the two of you share it, you are running the oldest human program there is. We handed the gathering to a store, and the hunt to a shelf. But the machine underneath has not changed in 100,000 years. The first human meal was never really about the food. It was the fire, and someone to share it with.